And that way, those who are here for those items that end up on consent, we won't have to take up any of more of your time. So welcome to the Plan Use Management Committee and the special joint meeting with the Transportation Committee. We're still waiting for the other Transportation Committee members. But as I said, we do have a quorum for the land use portion of it. And what I'd like to do very quickly is run through the consent items as the Transportation Committee assembles. So that being said, we do have consent on items 5, 6, and 8. 7 and 9 is on consent. So we've got 2 cards there, and if you don't need to speak, that can go on consent. So item 7, we have a gentleman by the name of Bill Christopher. You don't need to speak, sir. Wise man. Item number 9, Armin D. Ross, the grumpy old man. You're on consent. You don't need to speak. You want to speak? I'm sorry? That's an appeal, so okay, we'll let that go. We'll make sure we address it. So we do have items 5, 6, 7, and 8 on consent. Item 11 will continue to February 26th, Plum on March 18th. Is Director Goldberg here today? No, not today, so we won't have a report. We will not have a report. On 13, do we have anyone here on 13? No? Okay, report has been submitted, and we will have a planning presentation next week. So we did get a written report, and we'll review it next week. So that takes care of 12 and 13, 5, 6, 7, 8. And those we can move now. I have a second on that, Councilman Weiss. So those will be moved, then seconded, and those on the consent. So those of you here for those items, they've been taken care of. How are we doing on a quorum, Madam Chair? Communication? Okay. So would you like to? Okay. Let me just take care of 4A and B, then we can take care of that. On number 4, we'll note and file the CEO report in as much as it is being submitted for information purposes. 4B, we can request a CEO report in as much as the resolution authority for Wind City Planner through June 30th, 2007 has expired. Can you get a second on that, Councilman Weiss? All right. There's a second on that, so we take care of 4A and B. And it's my pleasure to introduce the chair of the Transportation Committee, and then we get started with the joint. Councilmember Gruhl.
Thank you. Actually have to turn it on myself. Wow. Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. We were reminiscing a little bit about being on Plum together, which, like I said, some days I miss and other days not a long time. There are 2 items on our special joint Plum Transportation Committee. The first, if the clerk, sorry, I'm used to having my clerk here, so I don't know if you want to just announce the item.
Item number 1 is a motion for the Planning Department in collaboration with the Department of Transportation and in consultation with Council District 1 to report on various land use policies, directives relative to the part of the new bicycle plan and a section of the transportation element.
Thank you. And for those of you who are not aware, I just wanted to remind you that when you come to the microphone, give us your name and address. Keep your eye on the clock. There's 2 minutes per speaker. I know some of you have written out a very eloquent letter and or statement. If you find yourself losing time, it'd be great to get to the conclusion, so that way we don't lose your main point. If someone who has spoken before you has made certain points, it's okay to say, I agree with the previous speaker, and add new points. So that way we don't hear the same thing over and over again. But I appreciate your being here. I know it's not the easiest place to find parking. So that being said, should we get the report from the staff?
Yes, because I think we just have before us is the motion, which would instruct them to come back in collaboration to do a number of things that are outlined here. So I don't know if the staff have a report? Michael? As Michael's coming up, last night I was at a meeting in my district in Sherman Oaks, and a comment was made about the importance of this bicycle plan that's going forward, and about our bicycle advisory committee, and in fact noted that my member had not been attending regularly, and which we did not necessarily know, so we're going to try to replace that individual with someone who would be able to commit to it. But it would be interesting if, and I don't know if that comes from your department, which is to let each of the council offices know, either one, if their position is kind of a reminder, we're going through this really important process of having a bicycle plan, and it would be great to have your representative there, and two, if they haven't been attending, some of that information would be great.
Great. What I did want to emphasize, and I appreciate the work that's going to be presented to us, but the reason why I wanted to focus on District 1 at this time is to experiment on how we can identify those opportunities. We know people who are riding bikes are doing it anyway, and as a person who is, as a youngster on a bike and struck by a car, I want to make sure the safety issues are there. And if we're going to find relief, and if we're going to directly address the global warming by being less dependent on fossil fuels, the bicycle to me is too obvious. But it doesn't seem to be obvious in how we stripe our streets, or how we prioritize the bicyclists, how we look at the width of our sidewalks, how we connect the riverway with the parks, the street system with our thoroughfares to get us into downtown. There's an incredible notion that I was introduced to called bicycle boulevards, where in other cities they're literally prioritizing the use of the street for the bicycle, and all of the improvements is for the bicycle on streets that typically are not being used by automobiles consistently. And so the challenge here is, where do those opportunities lie within our respective neighborhoods where we can create these types of opportunities as bicycle boulevards? Now, the challenge here is that the state and federal regulations dictate how the streets should look, which is very costly. And so the question becomes, where do we find the middle ground? Where do we find a place where we can get waivers or exemptions so it's not so costly but doable, where a bicyclist can actually ride their bikes on the street and not fear getting struck by a car? And so therein lies the purpose of the motion. And if we can learn from this, we can duplicate this over and over again, and invite my colleagues to do the same. It would be great to have a network of bicycle paths that have some continuity, but you have bike paths that begin in point A and then point B, but we have no connection beyond that. They might go 12 blocks, they might go 14. So again, I appreciate everything you guys are doing, and we'll hear from the staff.
Thank you, Michael Grant, Department of City Planning. I have Jordan Turner here from our department who's working on this update of this element currently, but we do echo what you're saying in this motion. We look forward to working with all the council offices and stakeholders on this. I think bike safety is very important. To get people out of their cars onto their bikes, they have to feel that they really have a viable way to get to different nodes in the city, and also to have a safe place to park their bicycles as well as ride them. And so part of that is the identification of the safe trails where they'll have access to go to, and also putting that information onto our maps, onto Zemus, so that people can look and find a path that's easy to get from transit on their bike and get them out of their cars, and provide a safe mechanism with our dedications we currently have. There's lots of opportunities to look differently at how we create the streets to make it a comfortable environment for people to recreate in and to transport in on other modes of transportation rather than just the automobile or public transportation, but actually use their bicycles and exercise and get out in a safe environment, and also be able to identify what connections are there. For the example, the work you've done on the river, Councilman, I think is a very important connection in the new developments that we see coming along the river and how those will integrate with this plan. So we look forward to working with you on that.
Great, thank you, Mr. Grant. I believe we have Department of Transportation staff. It's
Michelle Maurer, I'm the city's bicycle coordinator with Department of Transportation, and we are providing...
Michelle, can I ask you one question before you start?
Sure.
How much personnel do you have in your team? Like, what consists of your team dealing with the bicycle issue?
In the Department of Transportation?
Yes.
There is myself. Council's recently approved an assistant for me who will be the project coordinator within the bicycle program, and we have 8 engineers, but we do have a vacancy there right now, but we have 8 engineers dedicated to bikeways within the Department of Transportation.
So in a city over 3 million, we have 10 persons who are focused on bicycle issues.
Very true. It's
Okay, I just want to put in perspective.
And Michelle has been beating the drum, so to speak, to remind us. I mean, just getting this new position was difficult at best to get it through everything. So it's
So
very important.
there is a message of political will there. When we look at how we need to look at this challenge,
Right.
what we want versus what we actually put into the toolbox.
Right. I'm maybe the only person in Los Angeles who's slightly excited about the fact that we're facing gridlock at this point, because it is providing opportunities for us to look at bicycles for the first time and really look at us as a serious mode of transportation. The consultant we've hired for this team is Alta Design and Planning. They're one of the foremost bicycle planning teams in the nation, and they are working on the project with us now. To address your question, the second item within their scope of work is to address a collector network of bikeways and a gap closure methods between the bikeways that exist. So where we have gaps in the system, they're to determine how to hook that up to a network of bikeways that we develop along the collectors. I think this is the next phase of where we need to be. The old plan looked at the arterials to see where we could stripe in bike lanes on the big streets before we lost all the opportunities. We've pretty much run out of those. We have a few left, and they are also evaluating the old plan to determine where we can still put those in. But the next one is to really look at that street that's a level down. Less traffic volumes, as you were referring to, slower speeds, and where we have opportunities to divert the traffic back out onto the arterials, allow bicyclists through movements, and in neighborhoods where people want to slow their traffic down and get cars out of their neighborhoods a little bit more, we'll look for those marriages to create those opportunities to do so through the new bike plan.
Now, are you familiar with the city of Berkeley's bike boulevards?
I have ridden on them. You should know that they put those diverters in and as they established them to primarily get traffic out of their neighborhoods. They started upgrading those to create bicycle boulevards to address the issues of getting bicycle traffic through. They actually had to come back and retrofit the diverters, which were essentially curbs to move cars back out into the arterial streets so cars wouldn't use the neighborhoods to cut through from the main arterial to the university. But they came back a few years ago and retrofitted them for bicyclists. And that's what we would like to do also.
So I'm glad you said that. I was going to ask you, can we duplicate it here in Los Angeles?
In special opportunities, we can do multiple levels of bicycle boulevards. The full-on, fleshed-out bicycle boulevard in the Palo Alto example, and the first project was actually developed in Palo Alto. The main arterial through the city of Palo Alto is El Camino Real, with the campus of Stanford on one side of the roadway and the community really on the north side of the roadway, and it's a Santa Monica Boulevard, if you will, and it's not a place where bicyclists really want to be. So they took a street, a collector street, and created the first bicycle boulevard by doing this. Each time you came to a major intersection or signalized, they diverted the traffic out onto the arterials and allowed bicyclists to travel through. And that's the best case scenario, diverters, roundabouts, things that slow the traffic down. We can also look at ways of doing the same thing by making sure each intersection with an arterial is signalized, that we flip the stop signs around so bicyclists don't have to stop at every stop sign.
Michelle, I don't want to cut you off because you're on a roll, but...
Okay. Too much information.
No. What I'd like to suggest, and my colleague would work with me as the DOT chair, is if you can put together images that portrays what you've just described, and if we can do a motion to have a briefing to the full council on these options so that we can identify with these improvements and perhaps start thinking in a much broader fashion. And we can have, I'm not sure if you have this in your database, but how many persons we could move with these less expensive improvements when you compare it to a subway,
Yes.
or you compare it to a freeway, or you compare it to a major infrastructural investment like the monorail or the maglev or the bullet train. I mean, how many people are actually going to move with these bicycle boulevards?
The numbers will be difficult. We can certainly bring you a presentation of bicycle boulevards, and I have a number of slides myself. So.
Right, but I just think that, I mean, I was blown away about how many people move in these cities with these relatively less expensive improvements and these designations. When I say relative to these other bigger, beautiful dream romantic projects. So that's just something I would hope, but we'll move on that, and I'll ask my colleague if we would do a motion to do that. Because I think it would open up some eyes in terms of how we can look at this whole notion of bicycle and as a mode of transportation.
The mode split in the city of Davis is 20%. So 20% of your traveling public, whether it's for errands or to go to school or work, are riding bicycles for transportation. But you need to recognize that the city of Davis was the first city in the country to actually do innovations for bikes. They also had council members who went to Amsterdam and saw the light and came back and brought those in. And they did it in the 60s, so they have 40 years ahead of us to get there.
But 20% is a big number.
It's a big number, and it's the biggest number in the U.S.
Huge. Councilman?
They're flat, and they're also college school.
I want to thank the chair for pushing this forward. I mean, I'm for this. I think it's great. I just want to say something a little counterintuitive, which is I didn't realize that you'd been hit when you were a kid. I cycle now pretty frequently, and I love it. It's great. I ride before the sun comes up on a weekday and during weekends only, because I think it's very dangerous. I don't pretend that the sport that I do in L.A. is safe. I was just telling Ms. Gruhl I probably shouldn't do it, frankly, because it doesn't feel safe. I do it because it's fun. And I'm for this. If you can make this happen, my hat is off to you, because it seems really, really unlikely that, to me, that we'll be able to make L.A., create that sort of network that we need in L.A. But I'm all for it. We got to start somewhere. I ride, but I don't let my kids ride on the streets of L.A. I mean, it's
Councilman?
I want to thank you and Wendy for doing
Right there, slide it right up. There you go.
I want to thank you and Wendy for doing a joint meeting to begin with, because this is a joint issue, and we obviously need to be part of it. Talk about safety for me. How do we deal with it? Because many of the streets, as you and I know, have no bike path. And the danger for the biker and for the pedestrian and for the person in the car is huge. I think what Jack Weiss just said is a relevant issue about concern of problems. Can we take our streets and do what they've done in Berkeley and actually create a stripe area that really makes it impossible for the car to go in unless they're violating the laws, so that the biker has that safety?
Well, we can talk about safety as a large package, and we're talking about not just bicyclist safety and bicyclist education, but we're talking about motorist education as well.
Yeah, right.
Motorists need to recognize that they need to give bicyclists a little more room, a second or two out of their day, so they make sure they don't squish them on the roadway and all that sort of good stuff. And we want to be able to do more of that, and I actually hope that this coordinator we're going to bring on board will do more of those sorts of activities. The councilman is talking about a concept in where we take a street that's a little larger than a residential street, and we make it bike safe by slowing down the traffic and, again, moving through movements, taking the cars back out to the arterials as much as possible. Rather than creating a separate facility for bicyclists, it's a shared facility in which the speeds are lower, and again, the through movements are moved out to the roadway, so everybody gets the idea. We also sign it. Berkeley does a pavement marking. We can look at developing something like that. We have a wayfinding signage program that's actually funded by MTA that we, through the last call for project, that we'll implement next year as a part of this project also. So there are a number of things that need to be done. The councilman referred to the number of staff we have working on DOT that are just devoted to bikes. It's a city of almost 4 million people, and we've got a lot of work to do. But our time has come. The green movement is really happening. People want to ride for bicycles. We just need to get them off the sidewalks, and we need motorists to slow down some.
And saying that, when we do the maps someday within this context, we know, like in Venice, we're thrilled to have the Venice bike path that goes all the way up and down the coast, which is, thank you, Marvin Browdy, forever, for what he did on that, okay? Are we going to create a network enough with maps that if I'm a bicyclist, I know I can get from point A to point B if I take this street on this one, and then I move to this other street for this? In other words, feel safe that I'm actually going to be able to go, rather than do some of these things that really potentially creates the crisis.
We're actually finishing the city's bicycle map now. We've just gotten a draft from the contractor. So we're mapping out all of our existing facilities, but we're also rating the connector routes. So you will know what to expect out there when you're out there. If it's got a green marking between the street and you have a little red segment, you would know that maybe the roadway's narrows or we have a tough intersection to deal with, but we're developing a map that shows, again, our limited existing network, but also what to expect on the streets in between. We're one of the few cities that actually writes the roadways that we don't have bike facilities on. We don't do the whole entire city, but we do the connections.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for your leadership. You're doing a great job.
Councilman Rosendahl, one of the things I wanted to add was that there's a body of statistics out there that indicates that bike paths are less safe than bike lanes. And when I saw it, it seems it's very counterintuitive. And when I saw that, I questioned why that would be the case. I think what happens is that most of the accidents on both facilities occur at intersections. And when you're in a bike lane, the driver's aware of where you are because he sees you, he's just passed you. But when you come up on a bike path that's been separated from the roadway, all of a sudden the bike's in front of you, you had no idea that was going to happen. I think some of that is from previous designs. I think there are ways to make that better, but that's one of the things. And I wanted to ask Councilman Weiss if we have bikeways on, say, the street that your house is on.
It's not for bikeways.
I'm sorry?
Finish your question, I'm sorry.
If we have a bike facility on the street that you live on a street like that, would that encourage you or lessen your concerns?
No. First of all, I just want to say to people in the cycling community, I'm now a cyclist. I love it. It's great. I run a lot. I prefer cycling. I ride, medium length distances. But it's not safe. It's not safe. And whether if I'm in a bike lane, I don't feel safe. If I'm on a street that doesn't have a bike lane, I mean, we do these choke down things. All it takes is one person to open their car door,
right,
and you have to swerve. So I think it's great to educate people. Look, a friend of mine, my high school classmate of mine, was killed 3 years ago on PCH because there was some unanticipated road construction. He was riding up on PCH. You know who I'm talking about. I mean, he's wonderful, man. Unanticipated road construction and a catering truck just at the wrong place at the wrong time. So I'm for cycling. I'm all for it. I think that we need to go into something like this with a healthy dose of realism that we're the second largest city in the country. We're the city that's sprawled out over the last 50 years, and people are always going to live in Palmdale and work in downtown LA, and they ain't biking. They're going to be on the roads regardless of what the stripes look like. So just as a cyclist, I tell other people who cycle to be really careful and try not to do it during the week. I mean, that's...
Okay, great. Thanks.
But I'm going to ride my bike to District 1 and have breakfast with you, Mr. Reyes, and you'll show me all the great places. There's some hills there, right?
You got some hills, and you got a bob and weave. Thank you very much. I do want to recognize Mr. Baum. Mr. Baum, please stand. Mr. Baum has been one of those gentlemen that has been I do have a comment card, but I just want to acknowledge Mr. Baum.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, first of all, for taking bicycle transportation seriously. As you know, we have increased the use of bicycle for transportation, increased from 0.5% to 2.5% in the last year. So that shows you that we have done a great job. People going to work now by bike. With your help on your interest, we can do even a better job. So we thank you very much for your effort, and I assure you, don't worry so much about the safety. We all are very safely. I've been riding for 85 years, and I have always considered safety a priority. So does the Bicycle Advisory Committee, is very conscious of the safety of all of you. So I thank you for your effort, for what you're doing for us for bicycling. Thank you very much.
And colleagues, you should know that we have here a gentleman who has his name on the bicycle bridge crossing Los Feliz as part of the Yellow River system, the Alex Baum Bicycle Bridge, because of his hard work and tenacity over the decades in bringing the bicycle issue to the front. So thank you, Mr. Baum.
Thank you very much.
Councilman Labange, this way. Okay, we have two more cards. We have Barbara Monathan-Berg and Yolanda Gonzalez.
Honorable Council members of the Plum and Transportation Committees, in conjunction with the LA Rio, there will be a bikeway along the LA River shores in Studio City. And the stakeholders of Studio City Neighborhood Council met with the staff from the Planning Department's Rio Division and the Department of Engineering, DOT's Bikeway Division, and also the Department of Recreation and Parks this last month. It was a terrific 4.5-hour tour with 9 stops where we looked at all the individual sections and what could be done. We really would like everybody to know that in Studio City we need the south side shores of the river to be for the bike path, because that is the one furthest away from residential neighborhoods. Some of them are totally adjacent to the river, so for noise and screening and all purposes, that would be best to be on the south side. As co-chairman of the Government Affairs Committee with Michael Klausman, who put this together for our neighborhood council stakeholders, I just want to applaud the bikeway people who worked on this. It's a great beginning, and all the other staff of the city. Absolutely wonderful beginning for good communications, and Wendy Gruhl's staff was there. Evan Roosevelt was there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Next. Please give us your name and address.
I think you know me, Mr. Reyes.
Yes, I do, but for the record.
I know. Yolanda Gonzalez. I'm a stakeholder in 14th District, and my residence is Venice. I didn't know this was on the agenda, and I just brought it up because my mother came up to me the other day, and she said to me, how can I get on TV to have people respect the elderly and the bicycle riders in Boyle Heights? And I said, Mom, it's not going to happen until our people learn the language and respect American law. My father was a national champion as a cyclist, believe it or not. And when we first came here legally to this country, I lived in a community where I just couldn't believe I could ride my bike, coming from a large city like Mexico City. And then, when I moved back here to Los Angeles, I couldn't believe that I could ride my bike on the streets. But you know, today, if you read your Department of Motor Vehicles, and if you haven't taken your driver's license, it says there very clearly in English that the bicyclist and the car driver shares the same right-of-way. We are governed in this country by insurance policies. And if you get that going, then that bicyclist is going to have to be insured if he causes that accident. I think it's an excellent idea, but in other countries, they don't have the regulations nor the laws that are required when you go out in the street. I've been there, I've lived there. I lived in Paris, I have lived in Europe, I have lived in Mexico, and I've lived here in many parts of the States. I think it's an excellent idea because I know by the fact that people are driving their bicycles to work. Now, you want this to happen? Maybe it might take 2-3 years, and I'm in favor of it. You want to start? Let's start in Venice, where we have we already have the bicycles riding, the beach, And then we can institute and get the neighborhood councils to start doing a pilot program on this effort.
Thank you, Ms. Gonzalez. Thank you very much. This will stop public hearing, but we have two more cards. We have a Jim Mears and Eric Richardson. Jim Mears and Eric Richardson, and that'll be it.
Hi, Jim Mears, Venice resident. Mr. Weiss, to address your concerns, I was raised in Westwood, back before there was many buildings and, there was no campus. I think the answer... No, my son goes to Yale. That's okay. I'm proud swimmer, see? I think that the answer is that if you can get the development community behind you, I believe that the gentleman who's in his 90s is correct. The safety will follow. The safety will happen naturally. I've bicycled all my life. I think we need to create incentives for the developers, like a reduction in parking. If they were able to create a bicycle something, a component, to integrate. I mean, not just a bicycle rack, but some way of saying my employees are going to ride bicycles, and I'm going to guarantee that. And if I don't guarantee that, I will do something else. But some way of creating the development community who has all the money and who has the people and who have the people coming to work. If they were to buy into the program, then you would get a much larger enrollment. And that's my feeling. I think that anything you can, and the other thing is the exposition right-of-way, which connects up to the two sides of the city. There's an opportunity. I hope it's being integrated in. At this point, I don't think they're talking about a bike lane along the side of it, but it sure would be good.
Actually, the people in my district want it to be a bike lane only and not a...
Yeah, I would vote for that.
Well, we're not going to go there now.
But the Orange Line, which really has worked with having a bikeway adjacent there, and then Mr. Labange has worked in having it continue all the way into his district and all the way to Burbank, which is just fabulous in the San Fernando Valley.
Since I know you're active in street furniture, the company that's doing that in Paris just created a deal where you can take your bicycle from one place to the next, and it's their bicycle. You just have a credit card that you sign up for.
Yeah.
And that makes the connections.
Right.
So you don't have to own your bicycle. You just ride it to the next destination. You get off, you leave it behind, you check in the next one, wherever you want to go. And you take a bus for one stretch, and you take a train for the next. But there's a bicycle at the other end.
I saw that in Stockholm. You're absolutely right. But I did want to say one point that you were making. With the advent of transit-oriented districts and the movement of the SB 18, the discussion, I think bikes can also offset some of those issues that you brought up, which is less parking. But in return, we have to create more capacity for some mode of transportation. The bicycle was, I think, a great option. So
maybe it's higher density and being able to build your house. If you could figure out a way of enforcing that the components have to be tied together, but
Thank you, sir.
something. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I did want to recognize Councilman Labange and Councilman Parks who joined us, and Mr. Labange.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. I know Michelle Mallory's here. Does she have statistics on traffic accidents with bicycles in Los Angeles 2007?
I'm not sure they have it on hand, but that's something that we'd like to report on. Before you got here, Mr. Labange, I've asked the staff to present to the full council the bicycle boulevard concept, its improvements, what it means, with data that speaks to how that impacts ridership and how that improves ridership. But we've asked Assembly Member Mike Fuhrer to have the state begin counting the bicyclists as a mode of transportation so that we have data to work with. But I believe you had a question?
In response to the question about accident collision data, the collision data for the state, which is where all of our collision data goes, has not been updated for the last 2 years, but it takes that long to get all the information in. But we did do a study a few years ago that we looked at all the bicyclist motorist collision in the city over a 5-year period, and we geocoded them along all of the roadways where the collisions took place. We looked specifically for geometric problems that might cause collisions. What we did find, and what we were surprised, is that most of the collisions occurred on the arterials. No surprise there. And almost everything, about 80%, was related to intersections. Bicyclists...
Anyway, I hope we should get the information because, whether the police department or fire department, I'm sure they go on that. My biggest fear is the most recent rage is people are riding their bicycles on sidewalks now, which I could understand, but then when they get to an intersection, they ride right into the street and then right up the next side of the sidewalk, the pedestrian issue, but also when I was on the MTA board with you, I think you remember that tragedy at Adams and Figueroa, that someone rode right off a sidewalk into a side of a bus and didn't make it home that day.
Right.
So I think those are just key things. I couldn't support riding on sidewalks, but I could I would like to see wider sidewalks that would create a bike lane, and I think you mentioned Stockholm, you see other European cities where they have a sidewalk, a bikeway, a curb, and then the roadway. But enough said, continue on. Thank you for your leadership on this. I do believe what the people at Studio City said is right about the bikeway. They said on the south side, but the key to that is on the north side, the majority of horses in the Los Angeles and Glendale Burbank live there, and those horses that live in Los Angeles, I have registered them to vote, and they all expressed that the bikes are on the other side of the river, and I want to get the horse vote, so...
Okay. Democracy. Mr. Richardson. Please give us your name and address.
My name is Eric Richardson. I live just down the street here at 621 South Spring, and I am the chair of the Downtown Neighborhood Council Transportation Committee. And I come to this issue as someone who cycles every day. It's my primary mode of transportation, but also somebody who lives in the middle of downtown, and so has sort of a different set of issues to consider than do people in a lot of the rest of the city. And so at the same time as we talk about issues such as bike paths and separated corridors and things like that, we need to be very conscious of how do we provide facilities in the heart of the city, in places where, you know, you're not going to be able to, there aren't a lot of streets downtown that you can take the cars off of. And so we need to work with the existing facilities to be able to make the streets that we have more cycling friendly. One of the very real issues that we have downtown is in regard to parking. I've actually worked with Michelle quite a bit on, you know, how do we get more bike racks downtown? Because in a lot of parts of downtown, you ride a bike somewhere and you want to go to lock it up, and you can't. There's no rack within a block or two. A little known part of the municipal code is that it's actually illegal to lock a bike up to a parking meter, but oftentimes that's all that's available. So I applaud your efforts to sort of bring this to the front, and I'm looking forward to seeing it all happen, and just want to make sure that we consider the issues of downtown and the issues of how planning can really play the lead in looking at, along with their urban design guidelines, how do bikes fit into that? How do we create this holistic approach to what our streets are used for?
Mr. Richardson and Councilman LeBlanc brought it up. Are you familiar with the rent-a-bike and how you can use your credit card to get to a bike, and someone's taking care of the bikes and get to them and ride in and drop them off and pick another one if you want?
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the ideas that we've been talking about here in downtown as we look at more transportation modes, as we look at how to encourage pedestrian use, how to, for instance, in the bringing back of the streetcar, one of the discussions is, well, how can we actually create an organization that then can provide several different modes of transit, all the way from the streetcar to car sharing down to even these sort of shared bicycles.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Richardson. And as he leaves, when I was chairing the Joint Powers Authority for the Goal Line, one of the, I consider tragedy is that with the cutbacks in the budget, we did not build the necessary parking facilities for the rail stations. And so now we're in a dilemma that we don't have the ridership that reflects the actual, I guess, benefit we could have had if we would have made it easier to connect to the rail station. So as we go through the process of understanding that shortcoming, I'm hoping that promoting these bicycle-type infrastructure, we can actually increase the ridership in these rail lines because it's easier to get to and it's convenient. So it's just another way of trying to deal with some of those shortcomings because of budget cutbacks on our rail stations. So that being said, I'd like to move to adopt.
Councilmember and members, and there is one more speaker card that's before you, unless the public hearing has been closed.
Mr. Stephen Box, just come on up real quick. And this is absolutely the last card. Thank you.
Stephen Box, I live in Hollywood, and I'm a bike activist. And I just wanted to applaud you for your efforts with regards to looking at more evolved ways to incorporate cycling as one of the modes of transportation we support. I'd also like you to urge you to look for common ground, because oftentimes the simple improvements that would facilitate more cycling are improvements that would facilitate a comfortable ride for everybody. For example, on the ride here, just enforcing the law. But there are 6 18-wheelers on my trek from Hollywood to Sunset to downtown, parked blocking either the bike lane or the number 2 lane. Right. That's simple enforcement, and it makes it good for everybody. The potholes that I photographed on the way here, and I apologize for being late, I just can't resist photographing ugly, but there are 2 that you can get air off, which means that I'm going to be dodging to get here, moving into the way of vehicles that just want to get where they're going also. And the same goes true for some of the engineered conflict with pedestrians. Some of the low-hanging fruit is just maintenance standards that are good for automobiles, pedestrians, cyclists. Mass transit, keep in mind that one of the buses just cracked its windshield on Wilshire, hitting the whoop-de-doos on the westbound lane where the asphalt is actually driven over the curb. So some of the simple low-hanging fruit is just simply maintenance standards and enforcement. And I applaud your efforts and just wanted to say thanks very much.
Great. I'm glad you made it here in one piece and on time.
He's been an active member of our coming to our committee meetings and talking about it, and we did introduce a motion actually on the enforcement aspect of that and making it illegal to park in those locations. So I hope you'll let us know, Stephen, which you had before, where those areas are so we can send some of the DOT officers and others to ticket.
And last thing I don't want to mention, Mr. Wizard, when we were in Berlin recently, in the center of Berlin, they had a bicycle rental place. And I think over at the El Pueblo, it would be great if you could create a bicycle rental place at one of the shops. It was called Flat Iron or Flat Waffle or Flat Tire, not Fat Tire. It was Flat Tire. It took me a while tour. And Ed, you have to go to Berlin because the divided city that was once divided had a no man's land where the wall was. You will fall in love with the river there and what they've done with the bikeways. But a bicycle rental facility at El Pueblo would bring people from around the county, Metrolink on weekends, and ride around and explore downtown. So I'll help you on that anyway again.
I think the Metrolink area, that's one place we haven't talked about as much, and definitely with all the one place that people are taking public transportation well is there at the Cesar Chavez and Alameda, and that would be a great place where we could definitely think about linking whatever bicycle improvements we make. But do we have to call it Fat Tire? Can we call it something else, Mr.
I know. It was really something else.
Okay, anything else?
I'll get that.
Okay.
All right, so we'll move approval of the motion, and which will report, I think they have to report back within 90 days.
Yes.
I think that was the recommendation.
So it'll be the action of the Transportation Committee and Plum Committee. First and second, that will be the action of the Joint Committee.
Okay, item number 2 is a motion, Guru Reyes, requesting the Planning Department and the Department of Transportation to report back to jointly to both their respective committees relative in 60 days, relative to including residential and the calculation of new development approvals and improving the plans, that's the Ventura Corning Corridor specific plan tools for controlling traffic congestion in the plan area. Please introduce yourself for the record.
Good morning. Well, afternoon. Sean Hyrie with the Department of Transportation.
And Sean, just before you start, I want just a precursor for why we introduced this motion, because there was a report that came out about the specific plan of Ventura Boulevard and the fact that residential was not included in that. And although there's not been a lot of residential, as we look at things that are happening, we thought that was important to do, and there were some restrictions within the plan, and so I think if you could share with us some of those, and I do have some questions, but I want to have you give your presentation first.
Sure. I'll do my best to answer the questions and concerns as it relates to the Department of Transportation, but there are also my colleagues here from City Planning who could also come up and answer some of the more planning-related issues. As you recall, in the previous T committee, I reported back and I mentioned that we are working on finding a way to modify the plan, because the current plan has a horizon year of 2010, and the way the plan is currently written, it doesn't really allow for spending any money from the plan funds to hire a consultant and develop a new plan. This plan is fundamentally flawed from many aspects, one of which is that it doesn't really allow for administrative funds to be spent for instance, coming up with new projects and new proposals, or updating the plan when it's due for update. The other thing, if you recall, in the previous T committees, we had discussed our plans to implement some short-term projects to help traffic flow better along the corridor, and also to develop some medium to long-range plans. However, after working with the city attorney's office, we realized that the way the plan is written, it doesn't really allow for any deviations from the 19 intersections that have been identified in the plan, so that we could do some more meaningful projects, because the current list of projects really have not been competitive in the MTA call for projects, so we couldn't really leverage our funds to bring in any more funding to do bigger projects. And also the way the corridor is set, really not much can be done at those 19 intersections. We had proposed making improvements to cross streets in the vicinity of the corridor, or to parallel corridors to take some pressure off of Ventura Boulevard. Now, because of the restrictions of the plan, what we are proposing is to work with the city attorney's office to find a way to legally borrow money from the plan, because as it is, we're not allowed to use any of the plan funds. But if you could borrow funds from it, hire the consultant to develop a new specific plan for the corridor, then find a way to build into the fee structure to pay back the money we're borrowing. Now, one of the things we want to do in the new plan, as we do with any new plan that we work on, is to make it a living document, because these projects are developed, in a certain time period, 10, 15 years before their horizon date, and some of those proposals are no longer viable or necessary. So we want to be able to swap these projects in and out without spending $1 million or two every few years to update the plan. If we are allowed to build in a language to allow the department to work with the city planning and come up with alternate and substitute improvements, that would provide the same kind of benefit, but also kind of go with the times, then it would be a better way to go. So, again, I was just speaking with one of your deputies, and we discussed how the current plan is kind of relating development along the corridor and correlating that to traffic volume and improvements along the corridor. And the fact of the matter is that this corridor hasn't seen a lot of developments, but still the traffic keeps growing. So these are the fundamental issues that we'd like to resolve in the new plan when we hire a consultant and work on it. Again, you directed us in the previous State Committee to work with the community to present our short-term improvements. And I've instructed my staff, divided up the area between all of us, so we can meet your deadline of 2 weeks to meet with all the communities to present our ideas. Again, I'll say that to the committee here and also the residents who might be here. We have some ideas put forth. These are the best ideas we could come up with. We're not married to anything. The only thing I'm married to is my wife, so many improvements. Any suggestion the community may have, we're willing to listen. We look to them to help us improve these plans. And if some of the improvements are not what they want to see, we're not pushing anything. We're just proposing how to best spend the money given the restrictions we have today.
Okay. Thank you. And I don't know if there's someone from the planning department who would be the Dan or Tom or... Just a hello. How are you?
Good afternoon, council members. Tom Glick, City Planning Department, Valley Office. Planning's input on this is part of the request was to look at the residential developments along Ventura Boulevard since the 91 plan was adopted. Actually, to put it into context, if you actually go into the specific plan, the intent truly wasn't to incentivize residential, although residential can be developed because it's mostly C2 and C4 zoning along Ventura Boulevard. If you actually go into the plan, many of the FARs are at 1-to-1 and height limits are at 30 feet. With the C2 zone, you obviously can go with R4 zoning, but the FAR and the height limits don't lend to a residential development. If you actually go into the transportation tables where trip fees are calculated in by square footage, residential isn't even identified as a trip fee category. We don't assign it. So a project that comes in that does a residential project that does 42 trips or more will have to do its own traffic study, but will not be subject to PIA fees. As well, the triggers in the specific plan where we have the cumulative square footage numbers are based on commercial only, not residential. So the
Just in that was one of the issues, which was whether or not we could include residential in that as well. Because although there's not been a lot of residential, there is some residential on the boulevard as we look at that cumulative number.
And Priya Mahendale with our office has actually done a preliminary analysis since you asked for it, and we actually had Councilman Rice's office ask for it several months ago, so we have done a preliminary draft. It's a draft that we just want to keep as an internal draft where we can share some of the results of the residential projects. Priya can talk about it, but one thing I will say is many of these residential projects have been approved by discretion. They have not been by right projects. So that's looking to the past and saying, well, we've had a lot of plans, and many of them ask for exceptions to the plan, for FAR increases and height increases. So I just want to be fair to state that.
Right, and I think that the impetus was that when the reports came out as to how much development had occurred on Ventura Boulevard, it only used commercial, and that to have a real figure, which I know you're going to come up with, it should include whatever is built on Ventura Boulevard, whether it is residential or commercial.
In square footage, not just units. I mean, that's don't you agree?
Well, we tend to look at residential projects as units. We don't tend to look at it as square footage. When you look at a residential project, you say, oh, that's a 522-unit project. You don't really, we look at density in that way.
Unit is different from, I mean, is it a two-bedroom, a three-bedroom, a one-bedroom? I mean, you need to have, I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't want to know square footage.
Well, you would when ultimately you're looking at the FAR limitation. I mean, many of these residential projects, as I said, have asked for discretionary approval, which is an exception to the plan to go above the 1-to-1 or the 1.25-to-1, and many of these have been approved that way.
Do you not have the ability to calculate square footage, or are you just saying methodologically you'd rather not?
Well, when we actually go to and Priya can talk to this, but real quick, when you actually go to the building permit says 522 units. So it's, a lot of our methodology doesn't look at it. Yes, I mean, ultimately building safety has to make sure that if you have a 3-to-1 FAR, a 3-to-1 FAR is not exceeded for a residential project. But at the end of this, I mean, really the environmental trigger when we look at even if we look at trips, they look at it based on units, not on square footage of a residential project. So when we look at our EIR, we look at the EIR for Ventura Boulevard actually made an assumption, and I can't remember what it is right now, and how many residential units would have been developed by right under the specific plan at its build-out, and it was based on units, not on square footage of residential projects. So, but if you want to, Priya can talk in preliminary about her findings. If you're interested in the types of residential developments that have been approved along Ventura Boulevard.
And I think, before we get to that, maybe Mr. LeBlanc, you have a
We're
question?
all interested on that. I would just like to say to the committee, because Cahuenga, Ventura, it starts in the Cahuenga Pass in the 4th and goes west all the miles out to Winnetka. I would think because we're downsizing a little bit to the crisis there, if the city attorney could say that some of this fee could be used to get a city employee, as opposed to a consultant, to brush up, instead of starting all over again, to brush up the connection here to see what our values are, shared values are. The one thing about this corridor is you have basically one street. You don't have the option of side street. It's not like Wilshire, which has a 6th and a 7th on either side of it at most points. It is just one street and very few parallel streets, Moore Park for a little bit there that does that. And additionally, the largest project in most too dense for my taste is going through, we're waiting for the EIR, is the NBC Universal project. And that comes through this corridor as well, although not on it, but near it. And lastly, whatever we do, and this is great that the head of the Planning Committee for Council, head of the Transportation Committee, we should have a parallel thought on the Ventura Freeway and the Hollywood Freeway and those connectors and how they work, what needs to be improved within the existing right-of-way. I'm trying to get additional lanes through the interchange because it chokes, because there's only 2 lanes that you can go from the San Fernando Valley if you wanted to go to Glendale, Pasadena, Highland Park, these areas. So that's just a thought that I wanted to bring to the table. But I would say, instead of doing a consultant, which will take time, let's meet with both general managers of the department. I see the great Rita Robinson here, and say, let's identify somebody who has the skill and knowledge who could deliver something within 180 days, because I think the clock is really ticking on the whole street. Thank you.
And I think we're asking for a report back in 60 days. The challenge, which DOT can, is what's, and planning, what's allowed within the current plan, because we've been trying to, with those 19 intersections and see if there are some creativity to utilize some of those funds.
And I would say that we've been as creative as possible to find ways to make some improvements given the current restrictions. And again, we're going to be meeting with the community. I think we have already met with one group. We have 3 or 4 more to meet with. And if we, come across any good ideas, certainly we're open-minded, and we'll look at it. And to answer your question, Mr. Labanja, as far as that, having the city staff do the study, problem with, I'm not saying it's impossible, but a problem I see with that is that the process is very intense for a short period of time. So in order for us to get enough city staff to do it, we'll have to hire a couple of extra people that we will have to
so hire some good college graduate students, I think there's a way to figure it out. Because I think if you do this, it will just take longer. That's my opinion. But we'll discuss it later. Thank you.
Okay. Priya, did you want to share any thoughts or
yes.
insights before we...
I'm Priya Mahendale with the Planning Department. So these are really just preliminary, the number of units total along Ventura. So the total is just a little over 1,200 units. And then it's separated according to the community.
1,200.
1,200, 1,283.
It's 1,200 units between Barham and Vineland.
So these are just along Ventura.
On Ventura Boulevard. And I know one of the issues, sorry, Mr. Ray, is that, a lot of the traffic that we see, particularly coming from the west, is coming from places outside the city of Los Angeles, too, that are using that as their, passageway, which is what we found on Ventura Boulevard as well.
I'm just curious, the number of units are based on permits or by zoning, or how did you get that number?
Whatever were approved.
Approved
units.
So the capacity still needs to be understood.
Yeah, this is just approved number of units.
I think that would be good for the community folks to understand the capacity in terms of zoning and what's allowed, so we can understand.
Be billed by right. Okay.
Right. So that way your improvements will meet those expectations.
Great. Well, thank you. We may have some other questions. We do have 5 public speaker cards, I think, here. Florence Blecker, followed by Lisa Sarkin, followed by Barbara Monahan-Burke, Gordon Murley, and Pat Nathan.
Nice to speak with you again, Councilman. I've been a CD4 appointee to the Ventura-Coenga Boulevard Corridor Specific Plan since the mid-'90s. I've been attending PRB meetings since 1991. I'm the senior member on the PRB, and so I have been through the plan during the last plan amendment, which took 2 years to draft. We have been trying to get through Plum to even acknowledge an amendment for over 2 years. That has not come before this committee. When redistricting went through several years ago, the composition of the PRB changed because at the time the PRB was formed, there were 5 council districts that were involved in the boulevard. As a result of redistricting, it was reduced to 3, so our membership was severely restricted. We no longer have the force to act efficiently. And, I'm here, among other things, to pitch that this board, along with this, consider the amendment that we've been trying to get before this august body for over 2 years. It has died in plum or planning. I'm not pointing names. As far as the intersections, it is not merely the 19 intersections, but they're the Cross Mountain intersections, by which I mean Barham, Laurel Canyon, Coldwater Canyon, Beverly Glen, Topanga. Those are treated differently than the 19. So to look at that plan without considering those Cross Mountain intersections is foolhardy. I live in the Cahuenga Pass. As far as, I commend this body for considering the bike plan issue. We can't even walk down to the Hollywood Bowl.
No sidewalk.
No sidewalks. No, there's no way in hell there's room for a bike path. As I say, we have over 262 units going in my neighborhood right now. That is a significant load in a bottleneck area. I hope you'll give me a little more time. There are many, many issues in this plan. It is not something that can be fast-tracked into 180 days. We have been trying to get consideration for a long time. I'm delighted to see both committees meeting together. But, this should have happened a long time ago, unfortunately.
And Florence, they're going to cut you off because they're going to keep it all the 2 minutes so everybody can
But,
speak.
Thank you. I would be glad to speak more. There are many, many more issues.
I just want to, on one response, I believe I have over, this might be a low number, but I have like 230 motions that I'm trying to get to. And I probably am averaging between 15 to 22 action items every plum. So I'm trying to get to it.
2.5 years?
Some have
From 2002?
You're going to get blown away.
If you don't understand that he's got his workload is overwhelming, we'll work with you, Florence, on that. We're begging.
Lisa.
Thank you.
This is Arkin Studio City Neighborhood Council. That's why you need more members. That would be, okay. This motion, Wendy, that you were referring to, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to address, it is from December 15th. It says 60 days for these reports to be completed. This report has to have the square footage on it. That is what the specific plan requires. Now, if everybody is going to treat residential separately, then it shouldn't be included at all. We want a pinpoint review of the specific plan. No one wants it opened up. We just want the specific items that for some reason, for 17 years, nobody ever noticed that there was something wrong with them. After 2 reviews, we still can't get anything out of this plan. We don't have any residential in Studio City because we have fought against and resisted any exceptions to raise the FAR. That's why you don't see any of them on here. Every other one of these developments was not a by right. They are all by exceptions. The more I look at them, the more I find that these were basically allowed against the plan. There's no real reasons for some of the exceptions that were given, especially the Woodrise building at Woodley and Ventura Boulevard. They wanted a height increase because they wanted their ceilings to be 17 feet high. That's the only reason given. That is not a good reason to allow an exception. That's all I have to say. Thank you. Thank you.
Barbara Monahan Burke, 4223 Wilkinson Avenue, Studio City. Studio City Neighborhood Council, Vice President. All of Studio City has been working on this a long time now. And I wanted to just point out a very few things that need to be done in order to get through the first phase. And it's the cumulative permitted floor area and the existing floor area prior to the Boulevard Interim Control Ordinance for all commercial footage in this specific plan shall not exceed the following cumulative square footage by phase of development. So that is on page 14. And then when you go to page 15, it also has additional floor area allocations for each community and cumulative totals for each phase of development. In Studio City, our percentage has been higher than the other communities' percentage of development. So my understanding is whether cumulatively this meets the whole length of the boulevard cumulatively or within your individual section itself, which would in our case be Studio City and the Cahuenga Pass. Either way, when we reached that, we would have reached that portion of Phase 1. Then the other portion of Phase 1 is when you have 12 of 31. The PIA report, I believe it was, said 12 of 19, but there are 31 critical intersections listed in F, and I know Priya was going to correct that, so I hope you have that correction. But 12 of 31 are E or F, and I have asked that the department give a report on what those intersections, those 31 intersections have at this point. They did not have anything on file to say that, so they're going to go back and look. But that should be known. So there are different ways to do this. And traffic, north-south, east-west, it is just congested all over. Thank you.
Thank you. Gordon.
Gordon Burley, 4128 Morrow Drive, Woodland Hills, 91364, President of Woodland Hills Homeowners Organization. I want to commend you for looking very seriously at that. But over the years, we have found that for some reason, residential doesn't have to pay fees in a lot of specific plan areas, and yet they end up using it and not paying for it, which really puts a burden on what happens. I agree with what everybody else has said, and I will say that I'm very happy that Ms. Robinson is here, because one thing we need is communication between the planning department and DOT to even begin to make this work. We have a very large one going in where the Valley Music Theater is. We worked with them for 18 months to make sure that things would work, and we insisted to become mixed use as well. And each area, the councilman is more aware, because Mr. Weiss knows what Sherman Oaks is, and Mr. Labange is very aware, along with you, of Studio City. Woodland Hills has the narrowest point between the freeway and Ventura, which eliminates a lot of the solutions you would get on the eastern end, because they couldn't be done on the western end in the same way. So I would just urge you to take and make it work and let everybody pay if they're going to come in and build things on the boulevard and make no exceptions. Otherwise, you're always going to have the problem of trying to solve the problem. And one thing I've noted, that the city sometimes makes a mistake and thinks you can mitigate a mitigation ad infinitum. You have to make it work up front and not try to tinker with it later on where you can't solve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Pat? Do you want to make a comment? No? Okay. Great. That closes public comment on this item. Mr. Chair, that the recommendation was to approve the motion and direct planning and LADOT to report back in that 60 days with some of the issues that we've outlined today.
So we can second that?
Yes.
And that'll be the action of the joint committee? You have a question, Councilman Wines?
I guess reports can be prepared by the department. Is that correct, Ms. Gruhl?
Correct.
Both departments.
Both
DOT
departments.
and planning.
Which, well, two things. One,
if I may, I just want to thank Ms. Robinson for being here. Thank you, Ms. Robinson, the DOT director. Appreciate your presence.
I mean, one, all these issues always point up for me how if we could reorganize our government and do it again, we wouldn't have two departments. We'd have one department, because the functionality of what they do is so similar, and the overlap seems so unnecessary. I always wish we could just have one department of planning and transportation, and then we wouldn't have these problems of coordination. I'm wondering whether we ought to seek input from the city attorney in preparing the report as well, because there are different folks in the community who ask me, and I imagine also ask Ms. Gruhl, to do certain things from time to time, moratoria.
They're legal things, right?
Sorry?
These are legal things.
Legal things.
Okay.
Well, they ask us to do things.
I know.
And the question is, what is lawful? What lawful options do exist? So maybe we could just ask you to consult with the two departments, and so that they provide a menu, so that there's at least there's no ambiguity as to what the options before us are.
We can amend the action item to include that.
To include the city attorney. Okay.
We have 3 departments involved.
Okay, more fun. All right. So any other comments from my colleagues, our colleagues? No? So we can move this item from the joint committee as directed? That will be the action of these committees.
Prior to going to item 3, I just want to make note that we've lost our quorum for Transportation Committee.
Okay.
And move right along. It will go as a communication from Transportation and a request by the Planning Committee.
Okay.
Item number 3 is report from the General Manager, Department of Transportation, in response to motion, Rural Parks, directing the Department of Transportation to prepare and present comments to Southern California Association of Governments relative to the draft Regional Transportation Plan and related matters.
Good afternoon.
Please. Sir?
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Miles Mitchell with the Department of Transportation. This is Michael Davies, also with our department. And we are pleased to be here to talk about our report on the 2008 draft Regional Transportation Plan. We have worked hard on our report. The RTP is a long document, probably a couple thousand pages. And also want to take this opportunity to thank other departments who have contributed. We have with us Gretchen Hardison from Environmental Affairs, Carrie Cartwright with the Port of Los Angeles, Mark Adams and Paula McCard from LAWA. I think they're all here. They all contributed, and we appreciate their cooperation as well as the support of the CLA, who helped coordinate this. We released our comments about a week ago. So far, we've had favorable responses, no real criticism. We've also sent them to SCAG. SCAG has not indicated that they're particularly disturbed. They may not agree with us, but I haven't had any calls from SCAG. And we feel, frankly, that in many cases they're fairly self-evident, and there's a lot of common sense in there. So our policy comments are basically, we have 4 areas of policy comments, and then we also have a 5th area where we talk about the Metro Long-Range Transportation Plan. And I could briefly go through, give you an overview of our policy comments, or if you'd rather ask questions, that's all right too.
Well, let me ask this question, and then maybe it can frame how we go. Can you speak to the relevance of this document when it comes to funding and prioritizing how we access resources? Can you just speak to that?
Yes, of course. The Regional Transportation Plan contains, in answering that, I'll refer to the handout. The handout that you have shows a target, if you will, and in the middle is what we call the RTIP, the Regional Transportation Improvement Program, which is composed of projects that the MTA has adopted in almost all cases in their long-range transportation plan, and that have also been forwarded to SCAG. And these are projects that are with guaranteed funding, basically. And in order to be eligible for many state and federal funds, projects have to be in the RTIP.
But the MTA adopts projects that are put forth by the 89 cities.
Well, that's right. The MTA adopts projects that are submitted to them by the cities that are within the LA County, right. And then those are sent to SCAG.
Okay, I think Mr. Davies would like to express something.
Since we have acronyms that are far too close together that need to be separated, there is a Metro Long-Range Transportation Plan, which is also being prepared right now by the MTA acting as the County Transportation Commission. The MTA, in terms of funding, in terms of being a clearinghouse for where federal and state dollars go, that is an MTA function. SCAG is a regional or a metropolitan planning organization that takes into account what the various member counties' transportation commissions plan on doing and program.
Okay.
But SCAG should not be viewed as the clearinghouse for actual funding decisions. The RTP is the accumulation of county plans along with consideration of air quality impacts, because the primary reason for the regional transportation plan, the SCAG document, is air quality conformity of national standards.
So this is the policy side, and MTA, the MTA Transit Authority, is the funding side.
Actually, MTA also does policy as the County Transportation Commission.
Okay.
In terms of fitting them into a hierarchy, SCAG as a six-county region looks to try to coordinate the activities of the member counties so that when we talk about transportation projects, short-term or long-term, that they are coordinated. If you have facilities across county boundaries, that we make the best effort we can at programming in a way that the projects make sense.
And just, Mr. Reyes, because I know you're going on this too, because we had the MTA plan, which is being considered as we speak, has very specific projects in it. And it came to our committee week ago, 2 weeks ago, I can't remember. It came to our committee, and we said, these are very, because if they're not on that project list, although they can potentially be added at a later time, it is much cleaner and easier to have that part of whatever ultimate regional transportation plan exists for MTA and SCAG. So the department was given instructions from our committee to meet with each of the council members to go over those projects.
Right.
Because, see, I was right. Did I tell you all the council members are going to ask me this question? That they need to go meet with each of them before it comes back to council, which I think is next to committee, which is not tomorrow.
Well, they used to do that.
Well, actually,
we used to have access to that when we had money. But everything has been frozen for a period of time, and we lose sight of our discretion sometimes because we haven't been asked lately.
There is a project list which is included in the transmittal, which includes long-range, the LRTP or Metro product, which we have reviewed. We had briefing sessions with council offices last week. That list has been culled. I think the cleanup or house cleaning that would be done today would be to ensure that the list, as it is finalized for the LRTP, that is the list that is also transmitted to SCAG. The RTP has a SCAG adoption deadline of June of this year. So we are submitting our comments as required. The MTA plan is also looking for a late spring adoption. We are making comments on a preliminary basis to the MTA plan.
But that begs the question, if the council offices aren't engaged at that period of time when these comments are due, then how much influence and input do we have if who's driving this? Is it the department? Is it the mayor's office? Is it the commission? Who's driving that discretion?
You'll notice on the list of projects, depending on the type, whether it's transit, a high-capacity facility, or TDM, arterial streets or freeways, the level of detail will change because some project lists, the type of project lends itself to that. When we go through the biennial call for projects exercise with council offices, you'll notice that many of the projects that are listed are projects that were previously proposed through consultation with council offices to be part of the call. In addition to that, we just went through another exercise with the staff of council offices to go through those lists and either cull them further or add additional projects.
Would it be possible, because this is a lot of technical and a lot of shifting and moving target, can you give us a time frame over the next 3 to 6, 9 months periods of windows where these decisions have to be made so that each council office has a chance to be proactive?
I can give you the time frame for the adoption of these plans, but I need to repeat. Each of the 15 council offices was offered an opportunity for briefing sessions on these documents. We had participation from a number of council offices, and otherwise telephone communication or email communication.
Okay.
And again, these lists are an accumulation of past call efforts where, again, there was heavy council office and mayoral office
But the problem and the reason why 2 weeks ago we said they needed to go back is because the call projects, some of which we hadn't had a call for a long period of time, and as we go back, because your point is well taken, Mr. Reyes, some of those projects that we applied for during the call were put in priority order based on what we thought would be most competitive, not necessarily what we thought was the best project or the biggest priority, which goes to our larger strategic plan. But, and so what we're trying to do here, and hopefully we'll hear from the department tomorrow, and I will be asking them which council offices they talked to, which ones they had not on the MTA plan, to make sure that we have included everything that potentially could be in there.
Included everything or eliminated, because in some cases there were projects that are no longer supported by the community or the council office, which we've eliminated from.
Because the list was really, they haven't gone and said, let's start from ground zero and start about what our priorities are. They really take the old lists, which I would do too, and trying to figure that out, but that we want to make sure that whatever we are submitting, that there is buy-in by the city, because these only happen, the RTP happens how often, and how long does the strategic plan for?
The RTP is an exercise SCAG, goes through every 4 years now. It used to be every 3 years, now it's every 4 years. And again, that's based on air quality, Clean Air Act requirements and conformity. The MTA plan doesn't have a fixed time requirement, but it is in the interest of the County Transportation Commission, which is still MTA, to keep their programming and planning and their funding in a workable relationship.
Yeah. And
bear in mind, many of the projects, the lists are very long. There are critical lists, which is the RTIP, which are currently funded programs, which is used for modeling purposes to show air quality conformity. Then there is a strategic list. There's sort of three echelons. Why some of the lists are so long is that these are projects which could be funded in the future. Those are the longest lists. Those are not in priority order. Those are simply accumulations of proposed projects, whether they're in a community plan or a specific plan. They've been listed in a previous call that we've accumulated to give them a stature that they deserve beyond a fresh, brand-new idea that no one's thought of in terms of arterial or freeway.
Right. And Mr. Cardenas submitted a letter for a North-South Valley bus rapid transit project. Is that more appropriate in the SCAG or tomorrow's meeting in which we are looking at the local?
It can be discussed today and tomorrow. I think the question was whether it was included as a part of the programmed MTA long-range plan and therefore part of the RTIP for the SCAG plan, and it is in both.
It is already in both?
Yes, it is.
Okay, that's what I thought, because when I saw this I was concerned that it wasn't in there, and I know that there's been discussions and funding and all that had been put forward.
There's plenty of room for confusion because in one document it was listed strictly as North-South Valley Bus Rapid Transit, and that also includes the Canoga extension on the Orange Line, and that's what's confusing. It does encompass both. And both of those are in the among the programmed projects for both MTA and that are included in the RTP.
Okay. Sorry. Do you have any comments, Cox?
It's good for the second district?
We always want more, but I think the combination of what we'll be looking at Transportation Committee tomorrow and this hopefully will be all-inclusive of the projects we've discussed and talked about in priorities. But we did want to make sure if your staffs have not had a chance to sit down and talk with DOT, we encourage that to happen between now and our 2 o'clock meeting tomorrow. So.
Right. Anything else? Any questions from the staff? I did want to share with you colleagues, we have a resolution that I believe is part of the process we need to introduce as a document that comes from the city to the upper jurisdictions. So it includes language that speaks to the process and all of the due diligence that has occurred so that we can have a document that represents the city's interest. But I also included a paragraph at the end where it states that SCAG be requested to further evaluate the needs and priorities of local neighborhoods by prioritizing local transit markets that could include local circulators, improved bikeways, and enhance transit-oriented districts consistent with the city's transit needs assessment selection process. And the reason why I injected that is I was hoping we can begin to prioritize the local markets, which are local communities, as we look at these transit corridors, and we are cutting back on parking requirements as incentives. These kinds of studies will give us, hopefully, a funding opportunity in the future, because this will come to the surface as a priority in dealing with the local markets that will, in time, be much more congested. Some of you, I probably don't want to hear this, but maybe 20 years from now, you might have the 30 to 40,000 people per square mile that I have now in Pico Union and Lincoln Heights and in other areas. If you look at the trends of the city the past 10 years, that's the direction the city is going, because more people are coming in. So how we deal with that pressure depends on how we address it today. And that's why I wanted to put that forth as a priority on a citywide basis.
I'll second that.
Thank you. So that would be the action of this committee to adopt this resolution.
Yes.
Councilmember, anything
I think
else?
we have one card here.
We have to do one card, okay.
Richard Powers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Honorable co-chairs, members of the committees, I'm Richard Powers. I'm the executive director of the Gateway Cities Council of Governments. I'm here on your high-speed initial operating system to Ontario. But let me first tell you who we are. We're the 27 cities in southeast Los Angeles County, easterly of the 110 of the Orange County line, Long Beach, and up to and including East Los Angeles. Our cities were the ones that initiated the I-710 major corridor study, actually in 1999, if you can believe that. We were funded and completed the major corridor study in 2004. There was a plan in place. I'm happy to share with you that the funding partners, which include both ports for $10 million, our agency for $5 million, SCAG, Caltrans, and MTA, last week kicked off the environmental phase of the I-710 corridor, and in there would be a discussion of also the corridor that this committee has talked about, or others about, the cargo from the Maglev to Ontario south of the ports. The early phase of the I-710 major corridor study will look at alternative technologies. My board has unanimously said we can't get out of the port congestion issues without looking at alternative technologies, and all those vendors, including American Maglev, Echo, linear induction motors, all will be included in this, in the I-710 EI or EIS, which is a period not to exceed 43 months. I'm here on behalf of the mayors and councilmen of the 14 cities through which everything goes through to get out of the ports to the rest of the country, and we would respectfully request that anything additionally that the City of Los Angeles would like to have in that study, we welcome that, but we would really request that it be a part of that I-710 environmental process, and would certainly get a clear, complete airing. That's my comment.
Thank you very much, and a perfect timing in 2 minutes. I appreciate you being here in the Southeast Cities representation and working with us on this.
That was Mr. Powers.
Yes, Mr. Powers.
Okay, great. So we could essentially move this item by adopt the attached resolution authorizing DOT to submit the comments to SCAG on behalf of the city. And that's an aye vote on both committees, and that'll be the action.
We do have a quorum.
We do have a quorum for both committees, and this will be in council tomorrow.
Great.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes, for having us, and Mr. Weiss.
Thank you, and let's do this again sometime.
Yes, I think in a few months or something.
All right.
And
Thank you, folks.
sorry. Thank you, Mr. Weissar, too. How are you?
He's voting. Thank you, guys. Okay, that takes care of the action items on the Transportation Committee. Now we can move forward on the Planning and Land Use Management Committee with remaining items.
Okay. Item number 10 for the Planning Land Use Management Committee is an appeal by Didi Adu from part of the determination of the West Los Angeles area planning. Oh, let me go back, Councilmember. We need to go to item 9. Got ahead of myself. Okay.
Can we have Roberto come forward?
No, I'm going to take over this.
You're taking away his job?
Where were you, Roberto? Item number 9 is an appeal by Curtis Fralin from part of the determination of the South Los Angeles Area Planning Commission relative to a Mavericks flat located at 4225 Crenshaw Boulevard and various variances that were approved for this particular property.
Item number 9, correct?
Item property, yeah, number 9.
Ms. Green.
Good afternoon, committee members. Lourdes Green, Office of Zoning Administration. Let me just briefly, before I go into the project description, indicate that the appeal in front of you is an appeal only of 2 conditions. Condition number 38, which deals with the trigger mechanism for a plan approval for a review of conditions, and condition number 39, which deals with the term grant, which the applicant is appealing to have deleted. As an aside, only the variances are in front of you. They're only appealable to the second level of appeal process. There was a conditional use for alcohol sales. That is not appealable. That is subject to a 4-year term grant, so that, regardless of what happens today, stays as a 4-year term grant. With regards to the project, generally this is the renovation of a venue that was known as Maverick Flats. It was a historical and cultural venue, and which was on Crenshaw Boulevard and dedicated to dancing and entertainment and social gatherings. The proposal is to convert it to a restaurant, to a nightclub, 2 floors, additional outdoor patios, dancing, entertainment, alcohol sales in the patio and inside, a cigar club on the second floor, 235 seats. Hours of operation approved by the South LA Area Planning Commission were 11 a.m. to 11:30 Sunday through Wednesday, until 2 a.m. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. It is in the C1.5 zone, which does not permit entertainment or dancing. That's why those items are here in front of you as a variance. There is additional floor area that's going to be added, which triggered the requirement for additional parking, 3 parking spaces, and those are going to be provided off-site by lease, so that is part of the item that is appealable in terms of the term grant. The venue does abut single-family uses, which was the consideration of the APC and the ZA in rendering the conditions and the approval. It is a venue that has been looked as a catalyst by various entities and seems to be welcomed by many of the CRA and other projects into the area. Let me just get back then to the 2 items that are in appeal. One is the plan approval. The current condition reads that the plan approval will require a review of conditions. Essentially, this is a use that combines dancing, alcohol, number of sensitive uses, and the city, as is typical, would want to review compliance with those conditions. The plan approval is required to be filed 15 to 17 months after the effective date of the action. The applicant is asking that instead of the effective date of the action, it be from the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. The APC did not discuss what would trigger the CFO, or what would trigger the plan approval. They did ask at their hearing whether if an applicant was not ready to file because construction or renovation had not taken place, what's the mechanism for extending that? I indicated that merely a letter and to the zoning administrator of record, and typically we would just say, let's waive it until you're ready to file it, and we have a period of time to review it. Having said that, I don't really see, I see that it's reasonable to tie it to a certificate of occupancy as the appellant has requested. I don't see a real difference either way. I would just suggest that if you do consider that you require that it be a temporary or permanent certificate of occupancy, rather than just a CFO. With regard to the term grant, the APC did want to retain a term grant. It did continue the 4-year grant. As you know, these kind of uses under the best management. We don't know what happens on the operation. This does run with the land, not with the operator. So we feel that this is pretty common with our practice. Typically, when we have dancing and alcohol, we very often our office will establish 3 years as a term grant, and this year, recommendation was to have 4 years. I will remind you again that the alcohol sales will continue to have a 4-year grant, so if there is kind of sort of a bifurcation of the grants, it is a little awkward, but the applicant is requesting no term grant whatsoever, and I think that the commission and myself as the original zoning administrator would really have concerns that there would be no venue to review this, and in fact, while there is a revocation process, this committee is more than aware as how difficult and time-consuming a revocation process would be if there wasn't any non-compliance, and certainly having a term grant is a much easier way of looking and revisiting again, and if it's a good operation, it's, pretty much guaranteed that it most likely would be a favorable decision in the end. So if there are any questions, I'm glad to answer them or answer them later.
There was something you said there that I wanted to just kind of freeze for a second. You're saying that there is no venue to review the licensing process should there be complaints. Did I hear you correctly?
There is a review, the plan approval would review compliance with conditions. Then the other condition would be for a term grant, so that the grant ends, as we typically have with alcohol sales, when it's a new application. In this case, it's a new application and a complete change of use of character. And so we would always impose a term grant for in this case, it would be for the dancing and for the off-street parking. What I'm saying is that without that, the other way to look at it, if there were problems, would be really only through a revocation process. And that is so much more cumbersome to do than having a final term grant, at which point we can all revisit it again and make sure that everything has complied and weigh that into a new hearing.
And that's something I would like to address to the council member to see how he wants to approach this issue. But we do have with us Councilman Parks, also a member of the Transportation Committee.
Thank you much.
Many other committees.
A double here today. I would just like to make some comments. This facility is a historical location. It's been closed for well over a decade. We have been working diligently, as you know, with our recent ordinance about drive-through restaurants and a variety of things, looking for sit-down restaurants. It is in the Crenshaw specific plan, which requires a sit-down restaurant. We have worked very closely with the developer. We've agreed on all of the conditions that are in this report. The one thing that we would like to ask the committee to look at on one area, and that is that because of the pending financing and the difficulty of looking long-term, there seems to be some difficulty if we word it in the fashion that after a certain point he's got to start all over. We'd like to have the plan review after 2 years and then another plan review after 8 years, which should give us more than sufficient indication of how well the facility is running. We have made it clear that it is a restaurant, it's not a bar. If the building is open, it's serving food as well as alcohol. There's no time in which alcohol will be sold singularly. It also has other activities that are not present in the community, such as dancing, entertainment, and then I believe there's going to be a cigar club as part of this whole operation. So it is something unique to the community in that there's nothing that is close to that arrangement, particularly being in a historical site. So we're trying to work with the developer to ensure that we have the ability to have a facility open, not have a dormant building, and bring more activities on Crenshaw, which is very close to our Lemert Park area, which we're also attempting to revitalize.
So just to be clear, because of the financial structure, they need a longer period of time that their permits and their license will be in place, and therefore being able to meet their obligations. But the risk is, and what I'm hearing the staff say, we won't have anything in between to check the quality, or should there be disturbances, or it gets out of control, we would have to go through a revocation process. And that's the gamble you're willing to take.
So I think the issue that we have a concern is if it doesn't get developed, it will be a vacant building. And so we're willing to look at, and we believe that plan review after 2 years will have more than sufficient information to determine whether this is a good business, whether it is complying with all the conditions. And I think the staff said that at that time they will look at all of the conditions to determine compliance. But one of the things I think, being realistic, I think it's very difficult, and had this building been a easy project, it would have been developed a long time ago.
Right.
But it is difficult to go to the bank and tell them I need X number of dollars to put into several $100,000 in a building. But I only can guarantee I'm going to be in business for 10 years because we have to start all over. And I think that's the wording that causes businesses and banks to then back off and be a little shy of it. We think that, also I think we can't ignore the history of the developer. He has developed a number of projects in the 8th District and surrounding areas, and they're always of high quality. We've never had an issue with him not completing a project, not putting forth a first-class operation. So we have a great deal of faith in his continued effort, and he has other things on the drawing board that we think will enhance other parts of the community.
Gotcha. So the end of year 2 will be the gut check.
That's right.
For the next 8 years.
That's right. That's what we're looking at.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Any questions, my colleagues?
So I was just trying to understand this. As proposed, it's 4-year term of the variance. So it'd be once after the first initial grant, right? And then the council office is saying 2 years and then 8 years after that?
Yes. We're saying that that would give him an ability, if the building is working well, in order to him to work his financing. And the wording that hurts in the financing is that when we word it as is stated here, it gives the lender the thought that at some point it stops and ceases, and they have to start from ground zero and start all over on their permitting, which gives an indication the building could close down or the business. So he's having some difficulty in pulling together the financing for that period of time. So we think it's reasonable. Had he not had the record that he has in the district, we would not be making this recommendation.
Any other questions, my colleagues? Well, thank you, Councilman Parks. So, Madam Attorney, we wanted to fulfill the wishes of the council as they are moving forward. Will we grant in part and deny in part?
Well, first of all, you have to, I think, do you have any cards on it? Before we talk about that? But,
okay, we do have
for
one
the
card, but I
record,
think they...
Yeah.
Did you still want to speak, sir? Yes?
Before they speak, for the record, Sharon Cedar of Cardenas, City Attorney's Office, I want to remind the committee that basically there are 2 separate actions that comprised this application. One is a conditional use permit for alcohol, and the other is the variances. Under the charter, there's only one level of appeal, except for variances. Therefore, there was a ZA decision on the request to serve alcohol. There was an appeal to the APC. That action is final. The only thing that's before you today are the variances. Therefore, the only conditions you can modify are the conditions relating to the variance, not the conditions relating to the CUP, because that's final.
Okay, and that's the charter.
Yes, and your code.
Okay. Mr. Armin D. Ross, what's your name and address?
Armin D. Ross with Grumpy on Men Company, 1218 El Prado Avenue, Torrance, California. Committee members, I did have something that I submitted in writing to the Secretary. You can probably disregard because I'm going to deviate from it quite a bit in my comments. Just want to echo everything that the councilman said regarding the project and the financial burden that the applicant is going to be under to make this project happen. He's investing over $4 million just in the rehabilitation, update, and remodel of this existing historic structure. The sale of alcohol is tied directly and really cannot be separated from the dancing and live entertainment, restaurant, and cigar bar. And to put the burden on the on the applicant to have to secure financing for a period that may be running out very soon within that 4 years. The lenders have not been looking favorably upon that. So he's had very, very difficult time securing the financing because of that, the limitation on the grant. This 4-year term really discourages his investment. Financial institutions and private lenders have not been willing to commit based on that 4-year term. We think that the conditional use and the variance should both be tied together in that 2-year and 8-year plan approval period. There's some precedents for this type of tie-in in 2007 cases, one in CD14 and one in CD10. Where they did the review by the plan review process rather than them having to go through the entire entitlement process all over again. So we... Is that my 2 minutes? Okay, so we do want the committee to consider the comments of the councilman and also the fact that these two items are inextricably tied together.
I understand what you're saying, and I understand Councilman Park's statement, but we're getting direction from the city attorney of what this committee can do legally by the charter. So because of the commission's action, the charter dictates that that's as far as that decision goes. It's not appealable to us. It's not. And so I'm not sure if the council office representative, let's come on forward. Is the council member aware of the limitations of this committee, or was he under the impression that we were going to be able to take it to another level, knowing that the charter doesn't allow us? Is he aware of that? May I ask you?
No, he was not. That's why he included in his remarks specifics about eliminating or deleting the time period for the conditional use permit expiration, and then also extending to approval of plans. So he was not aware of that. And we actually got advice that was contrary to that a while ago from staff.
You got advice contrary from whom?
From planning department. There was a staff, not from the city attorney, from planning department staff. Prior to the expiration date, was that December when you had to file?
The deadline for the item to be in council would be the 26th.
Okay, so we have some time to continue this. I want to make sure the council is aware of these limitations, unless you want to carry it further when council as is, but I'd be willing to continue this for one meeting if it allows us. Can we do that, Barbara?
Yeah, we can continue to the 19th meeting. The actual deadline, council was the 29th, but we haven't noticed for council the 26th because of the date that we need to be in.
It's your call. I mean, we can move it to council with the advice that's being given to us by the city attorney's office. I don't want to do anything that's inappropriate or illegal. And we can continue for the next meeting so you can get that clarity.
Let's continue for 1 week and get the clarification.
Okay, for that being the case, it would be continued to the 19th in committee. And then we can go from there in terms of announcing the council date. But you may want to give further instructions as to what you want to see at the next meeting.
Put it this way, the law is not going to change. And then the madam attorney's looking at me like, why? This is the action, but then again, this is what it is. But I hate to move on something and then not give them the courtesy of knowing why.
Can I ask one last question, Councilman, of the city attorney? The effect of the 4-year grant for the alcohol sales, what exactly does that mean?
I mean, I think
at the end of that period?
My recommendation...
Can he just finish his question?
Sure. I was going to say that you can do all that offline. That's the purpose of the week, is to really figure out your options. I mean, that's why the chair wants to give you that week.
Right.
Just wanted to know the effect of that 4-year grant for the alcohol sales.
For the record, again, Sharon Cedar of Cardenas, City Attorney's Office. the effect would be at the end of the 4 years, there would have to be a reapplication for a new conditional use permit. On the other hand, your client could come in at some point on the plan approval, and I don't know if planning allows that to ask for modification of that condition. Planning's indicating no.
You want to continue this, or you want us to move on?
I'd like to continue this.
Okay, we'll talk again in 1 week, and hopefully we can get the legalities of our actions understood so we can move forward in a diligent manner. Thank you. That'll be continued. All right, folks. Okay, Roberto, you're back on your job. Thanks, Adam. Thank you, Barbara. You did a great job.
This is item 10, Councilman. This is an appeal by Didi Audit. She's appealing the action of the West LA APC, which approved a variance to permit the required off-street parking spaces by a lease agreement in lieu of the required recorded covenant, and this is for an expanded restaurant use in CD 11.
Good afternoon, Patricia Brown, and I'm with the Office of Zoning Administration. What's before you is an appeal of the Commission's overturn of the ZA action. They overturned the zoning administrator's action, and they granted a variance to permit off-street parking by lease in lieu of a covenant. The Commission also granted a conditional use permit for alcohol service on a patio. That is not further appealable. The Commission did not grant, there was an error in the determination, and a corrected determination has now been issued. They did not grant a specific plan project permit. The applicant has filed for a specific plan exception, but that is still pending. In their appeal, the appellant has raised concerns about the lack of the securance of a coastal development permit. This is within the coastal zone. To date, the applicant has not filed with the City of Los Angeles an application for a coastal development permit. If you sustain the Commission's action, I would recommend that you modify one condition and add an additional condition. Condition number 15, because they are providing, their parking currently is provided by a valet. The valet service, the applicant does not have a contract with the school district. The school district has a contract with the valet service, and the valet service has a contract with the applicant. So there's no direct contract between the applicant and the school district. They're using a parking lot after school hours where the valet parks cars on the school property.
That's a powerful valet.
It must be.
Wow.
Actually, condition number 15 currently reads, a copy of the contract shall be provided for valet parking services for parking spaces every night exclusively for Ashe Restaurant. This contract shall specify that no street parking or any other spaces available to the public will be used to satisfy this condition. I would like to recommend that you add to that condition that the location of the lot shall be identified and a copy of the lease agreement with the property owner also be provided. The school district actually did come to the Commission meeting, and they indicated that at any time they can cancel that contract if the school needs that parking. So it's crucial that we are able to identify where this parking actually is provided. Secondly, I'd like to ask that you also add, because the variance, which is the only part that is actually before you, was triggered by the addition of patio seating. And so I'd like to ask or request that you add a condition saying that before any utilization of the grant for the patio dining and alcohol sale and consumption on the patio, that they secure the coastal development permit and the specific plan exception. The applicant has indicated that they cannot meet the requirements of the specific plan. So therefore, they have filed an exception, but they haven't completed the application.
Another small detail.
Another small detail.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. That's significant. Okay. All right. representatives of the appellants here, or the appellants themselves? Please come on up, give us your name.
Hi. My name is Dee Audette. I'm president ex officio of the Venice Neighborhood Council. Because the West LA Area Planning Commission overturned the zoning administrator's ruling after the Venice Neighborhood Council had reviewed this issue, and also the item of the Coastal Commission came up. It was thought advisable, and so I said, okay, I'll sign an appeal, and so the people who feel deeply about this can come before and tell you the specific details they think you ought to know. And thank you very much.
Okay. Before we ask anyone else to come, I'd like to ask the council staff if they want to speak first or last. Okay. Please give us your name and address.
Jim Murez. I'm a member of the Land Use and Planning Committee for the Venice Neighborhood Council. This is the Neighborhood Council's file, not mine. This is my file. This is a document that was sent to me, and I only have one copy, from Chuck Posner of the Coastal Commission. The applicant knew and has completely, in the neighborhood's mind, sidestepped the whole Coastal Commission issue because parking is a huge issue. They're expanding their square footage and they're not providing the parking as required by the Coastal Commission. The Coastal Commission made it very clear to them in their original decision that if there was any change to the site whatsoever, they had to come back and get a coastal development permit. Well, they have now been granted the permit that's before you without being required, as Ms. Brown said, to have a coastal development permit. So if this was to pass, they could theoretically do what many other businesses in Venice have done. 2 doors away from me that for 17 years didn't get a coastal development permit because the city doesn't enforce going to the other agency unless it's put into the conditions. So I think that a lot of the neighborhood council's desire to have this thing heard before your group was because the coastal development permit, the permit was not a requirement. As far as the parking is concerned, this neighborhood is tremendously underparked. The existing restaurant that's there, as this document says, has 0 parking whatsoever on site, and all of their parking for the last decade has been on the streets or maybe with the valet service at the school 2 days a week. And it's been an ongoing problem. It's not just this business, it's the whole street of Abbott Kinney if you've ever been to the neighborhood. So anything you can do in that direction, I would appreciate. I'll give this to your secretary if you want to.
Okay. Anyone else speaking with or part of the appellant's case? Please come on up. No one else? Okay. We do have Denise Kaufman here with us, Joanne Moore, Bruce Evans, Yolanda Gonzalez waived her desire to speak, and Linda Meltzer. Sir, give us your name and address.
Good afternoon, Bruce Evans, Solomon, Salzman, and Jameson, 426 Culver Boulevard here in Los Angeles. I represent Ashe. I thought this was going to be a fairly simple hearing. There's one appeal filed by one person, and it raises one issue. And the appeal asserts that the determination of the Planning Commission was somehow in error because there's no coastal development permit. After that appeal was filed, I submitted a letter to the Planning Department citing the law, providing a copy of the coastal development permit. This issue never came up in any of the hearings because it's a total non-issue. In fact, I specifically brought up in one hearing, and there were 4 public hearings before the Planning Commission in this case, that nothing was going to happen in this case for a long time because the coastal development permit had to be amended. Now, I've cited the law in the letter that I've provided to the committee. It's very clear under the coastal regs that before an application can be made to amend the coastal development permit, we have to get the local approvals. I personally talked to Chuck Posner. I talked to him before we filed the application. I read the law. I talked to him after we filed the application. This is a non-issue. This has never been an issue until it's been raised now. There's one issue that's before you, this coastal development permit. I've given it to you. There is a condition that requires it be amended if the restaurant's expanded. When Ms. Moore gets the approvals from the City of Los Angeles, she will then need to go forward to the Coastal Commission before anything can happen with this expansion, and she will have to seek an amendment of that coastal development permit. Only then, after she's obtained the approvals, can she do so. Not now. That's very clear in the coastal regs. I've cited the law for you. I can tell you, there's one issue in this case, but this lady's been put through hell in this process for simply trying to expand into a garden space. I don't know what possible basis there is for the ZA to come in now after the case is final and request a modification of the CUP conditions. It's just totally improper. The Planning Commission heard the evidence. They heard 4 hearings in this case, so I'm asking you, affirm what the Planning Commission did. It was the right decision. I've also provided you a letter from Councilman Rosendahl, Mayor Reardon. Rosendahl, I wish he was still here, indicated that he's strongly opposed to parking.
You did say Mayor Reardon, right?
I beg your pardon?
You did say Mayor Reardon.
Former Mayor Reardon.
Okay.
I know when it's president, well, you still say president, even if it's a former president. So,
make sure.
Former Mayor Reardon. Councilman Rosendahl indicated in his letter, I've given you copies of it, he's generally strongly opposed to parking variances, but because of the unique character of this business, that it's a local business, he supported the project in this case, as did his planning deputy at the public hearing. This is a fairly simple case, and doing what's right is to affirm the decision of the Planning Commission here. All of the conditions, they were haggled over at the hearing, they should stand. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, we'll call you up if we have any more. Any questions? Okay. Our next speakers. Your name is? Okay.
Hi, I'm actually a neighbor of the applicant, and I have been in attendance at every single hearing that has been on record for this particular case. And I'm actually here to represent not only myself, but also the tenants in the building that are neighbors of the restaurant. And we are adamantly opposed to this expansion, not only for the reasons that have been cited with regards to parking by lease as opposed to the covenant. I have been directly in contact with LAUSD on a number of occasions, actually got them also to come to hearings in the past. And the fact of the matter is that the restaurant has never had any parking whatsoever legally. The contract that is in the file that they have submitted with Continental Valet Service is actually an unsigned, unexecuted agreement, and LAUSD has also stated that they have no plans to renew the agreement with Continental when the lease, when their agreement with the valet service is up this 2008. So effectively, there will be no parking, valid parking for the restaurant come this summer. And furthermore, the agreement with the Continental Valet Service provides only parking on the weekends, Friday and Saturday, so it doesn't have it through the middle of the week. Furthermore, as a neighbor of the restaurant, I understand what the expansion would actually do greatly negatively impact our quality of life. There's been an open fire pits in the past where smoke has actually come into our apartment buildings. People have, left trash on our property. The coding for the gradation of the land itself, improperly. The drainage is actually improper. So there's actually a number of things that negatively impact.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Very much.
Ms. Yu, how long has the restaurant been there? How long has the restaurant been there?
It has been there, I believe, since 98 or 99. And the residents actually of the building, 3 out of the 4 tenants, we have been there 3 years actually, 3 to 4 years longer than the restaurant, current restaurant. And we never had any problems in the past. We've always had restaurant goers, actually customers also constantly parking in our driveway.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I have Joanne Moore, Linda Melter, and Denise Kaufman.
Hello, Joanna Moore, 630 Westminster Avenue is where I live, and I'm the owner of Ashe Restaurant. And I've been there managing the restaurant for about almost 10 years now. And I am a resident of Venice. I grew up in Venice. I grew up in Santa Monica.
And you are the owner of the subject restaurant?
That's right.
Okay.
And I'm a big advocate of locally grown produce, and I'm very much an advocate of people walking and bicycling to the restaurant, skateboarding, alternatives to driving their car. But first and foremost, I mean, I've lived in that neighborhood within a block or two of Abbott Kinney, and it's not just a business parking issue, but it's also residential. People build above their garage, and there's lots of extra residents living in the neighborhood. There is a parking issue in Venice. It's not a secret. There's a parking issue all over the city. It's a big city. There's a lot of people. So I am proposing to have a garden for people to sit in as an alternative to inside. It doesn't mean it's going to be packed all the time. It just means it's an alternative to interior seating to enjoy. We live in Southern California, and we have beautiful weather most of the year. And I have a strong, strong following of people who really love the restaurant, and they would love to sit in the garden. It's not construction. It's a garden. And this is my 7th hearing over this, and it saddens me that it's taking so much time and effort on so many people's part over a garden. And
so the garden exists?
It exists. It's a garden space. There's no construction
So
whatsoever.
you want to put tables and chairs in the garden?
Excuse me?
You want to put tables and chairs in the garden?
I'm allowed only 25, has been determined, 25 seats. And maybe on Friday and Saturday night there would actually be full, but
So
otherwise and it's a weather by
You've
weather.
had one hearing basically for every 3.5 seats.
Thank you
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Linda Meltzer and Denise Kaufman.
My name is Linda Meltzer, and I live at 2800 Grand Canal in Venice, walking distance from Angers. And I just want to try to explain, if you haven't been there, what a part of the community, how special for the community is. On Saturdays and Sundays, it's just all bicycles built for two with kid packs in the back. It's just, the restaurant is just full of bikes, and there's children running around. It's a very community-oriented restaurant. She often gives back to the community and has benefits for local farmers. She has many benefits for school, giving money to the school program for meals. She's a very important part of the Venice community. And Abbott Kinney doesn't really have much parking. I think next door, some of the only parking for the apartment building next door, some of the only upfront parking I've seen, it's mostly pedestrian, and that's part of its charm. And I think the variances, after all these hearings have been given, because it is of such unusual character for the neighborhood, and it's so important for the people, most people of Venice. I see some of the people that are complaining here, that the opposing people, frequenters to the restaurant. It's, supporting the organic local produce, and
I think they're admitting it too.
Excuse me?
They are admitting that fact, that they do it.
Oh,
too.
yeah.
Okay.
Yes, but I think it's important the variances are variances for a reason, to support a small local business who gives so much more to the community than most other establishments. And I think that's why the councilman's supporting it, the former mayor supporting it, and normally, so I think it's an important part of the Venice community and lifestyle.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Our last speaker is Denise Kaufman. That should conclude the public hearing.
Hi, I'm Denise Kaufman, and I live in Venice, California, and I own a home there, and it's within a few blocks of Ache Restaurant. This is, I think it's my 6th of the 7 hearings. I wanted to say that Joanna didn't mention that she has 5 parking spots that she rents in an adjacent office building, as well as the 20 that she rents contract for on the school parking lot. So she actually has 25 parking spaces that she pays for. We thought this hearing was only about a coastal permit that, in fact, she has and is in process of getting, so we really didn't think that they would be speaking to any of the other issues, all of which have been discussed in the previous 6 hearings. And The hearing that was in front of the Commissioner Boer, he said that there were more people at that hearing than he'd ever had at a public hearing. I just want you to know the affection in the community and support for this restaurant is huge. If we had let people know that this hearing was happening today, this room would have been full of people. It's an adored restaurant. Joanna buys from local farmers. It's a green restaurant, organic, and in Venice, it's really appreciated. Families come there and would like to sit out in the garden on a nice summer's day. This process has taken almost 2 years, and I really urge you to follow. The Planning Commission has heard all of this information, and to affirm their decision would be the right thing to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That concludes the public hearing. The Councilmember Representative, please come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Greg Asher with Council District 11. A lot of side issues here, but I think just in sum, to keep it short, and then I could be available for any questions, is that we continue to support the restaurant and support the commission action and urge you to deny the appeal.
Okay. Do you have a question?
I move Mr. Asher's recommendation.
Okay. Before we do that, I just want to get some clarity on the process here in terms of the Coastal Commission permit.
Right, can I ask, there were 2 conditions I requested that you consider. One was to modify condition number 15 so that we know where the valet will be parking and if the valet has a contract to park at that location. So just that they also have to supply that information so we know where it is. The other is that they move ahead and meet all of the local and state requirements with regard to the CDP, and they filed the SPE, but they haven't completed it. So that they complete those 2.
So it allows it to move forward with these conditions. Is that what you're recommending?
Yes, I'm just recommending you modify one condition and add one.
Can we ask the lawyer to come forward?
I'm sorry?
The lawyer?
Mr. Evans?
To Planning Department, if that is a recommendation or that's a condition that they follow all laws, they already, my question would be, they have to follow the state law. Their lawyer has said they're going to follow the state law, so why would we, the legal word is surplusage. Why would we do that?
Okay. Come on, Pat.
Part of the problem, at the time, the reason why the commission actually had this case before them for five meetings. What happened is they kept delaying it because they were waiting for the filing of specific plan exception. They filed specific plan exception, but it was not completed. So they finally went ahead with this action, said you have to meet the parking requirements. The specific plan exception is still pending because they haven't completed it.
But that exists, has an independent existence of this matter before us today, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if it does, they'll have to go through that process.
They have started it, but they have not moved ahead on it.
So you're creating a hook to make sure it gets fixed.
If they meet all the requirements, I think that will assure the appellant has raised the issue of the CDP. It assures them that we recognize that they have to go through all of these.
Gotcha.
But
it doesn't mean they can't. We could allow this business to move forward. The language is creates the hook to make sure they close the loop.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's it.
But it doesn't keep them from opening it. Or expanding.
As far as the CDP, I gather that it does stop them until they get the CDP according to what.
Right, the CDP.
Well, there's other laws.
Yeah. This should boggle your mind because when we're through with this process, we're going to have to go through a process with the Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control and then the coastal permission. And let me just be clear about this coastal condition here because there's never been any ambiguity about it until now. Basically, the structure, including any increase in customer service area, will require an amendment to the permit or a new coastal development permit. That's what it is. We've always known all along we're going to have to complete that process.
Answer my question, both the lawyers here. what I hear the planning department saying, maybe I'm misunderstanding, is adding a condition that in effect says, by the way, follow all the other laws. Well, they have to follow all the other laws anyway, right? Ms. Cardenas?
For the record, Sharon Cedar Cardenas. Yes, Councilman Weiss, I would agree with you. Condition 1 of the conditions of approval says that all other use, height, and area regulations in municipal code and all applicable government regulatory agencies shall be strictly complied with in development and use of the property, except as such regulations are inherent, specifically varied, or required. So I would say that they have to comply with state law anyway. However, I think what the planning department, as the ZA is suggesting, is that they want to make sure that they get some proof that in fact they get their amended CDP, and by adding it as a condition, it's something that then planning would see before they could use the approval.
CD 11, is it overkill, or do you want this condition?
Mr. Asher, for the record, come on down.
I guess I'd say, actually, it is overkill. Do you want the condition?
We were expecting that they would have to go and get their CDP amended, and that would be the next step here after the city's process. So we didn't really see it as necessary as part of the city's approval.
See, I would just err on the side of being overly cautious, have it in writing so that if it doesn't happen, we have something to go to. It's not going to hurt you.
We have to amend the coastal development permit. I have no problem providing the city a copy when we do it. I do have a problem with the planning department asking for new conditions at this late juncture after the appeal time has ran. The other point I want to make here, there's an assertion that we haven't completed our specific plan exception permit. It's another absurdity. We filed that sucker about 2 or 3 months ago, and I haven't received one phone call.
Easy there.
Other than
Guys, I actually think, with all due respect to the message that the planning department wants to send to the community, that this is inconsequential. I think the committee is going to, I expect the committee will vote to approve, vote to deny the appeal. This is just one little thing. Do we add it or not add it? I don't think it matters. It's basically, it's like when you're on probation and the judge says, obey all laws. You have to obey all laws anyway. I think it's overkill. I don't think it matters. Does it actually have an impact on you?
I don't think it has any impact. I'm concerned about the other conditions that the ZA has sought here. The coastal development permit.
Which is the condition that has an impact?
Oh, she was asking for some other assurances about that my client have a direct contact with contract with the school rather than
Is that before us now? Planning? They're not asking for that. Okay, so they're asking for anything that has an impact.
So what we're asking for is there's a contract between the applicant and a valet service. The valet service parks cars somewhere. Right now, they're parking it at a school. The school says they can cancel that contract. We want to make sure that they are providing the parking. In addition, just to answer your question, we have a plan approval. So what happens is we go back and we look to make sure, so whether it's a CDP, the valet parking, we're going to go back and look under that plan approval to say, did they meet all these requirements? So it is a trigger, and it does become important for us in review.
Okay.
Just to cut to the chase, I'm agreeable to the CDP.
Cut it off, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Evans,
I'll submit the CDP, no problem. I object to any other conditions being placed on the permit.
Thank you, sir. Well,
my motion is the same as it was before. Mr. Asher's initial recommendation, deny the appeal, full stop. I think I'll say to the residents of Venice, with Mr. Asher and Mr. Rosendahl on the case, they're sticklers for all this stuff, and they're going to assure that all other laws are complied with, and I think that's good enough for me. So that's my motion, Mr. Chair.
so you're excluding the conditions.
Yes.
Boy, I'd like to include the conditions. Mr. Weezer, it's all on you now.
the ZA's point is that there's no guarantee right now whether we will have a place to park those cars. Something needs to be put in place to ensure they will, and I don't think that is overkill. I think that condition is a minor one. It would have to happen somehow. We just have to see it. And I'm always one that sides on the err with caution to make sure we have everything in place before we move forward. So I'd like to add that condition.
Okay, so we have a actions committee? Yes,
Excuse me, Councilman, and what about the CDP, the amended CDP?
Pardon me?
But there was one other condition that was relative to the applicable state and local laws, compliance with those laws.
Yes.
Are you in support of that?
Both conditions is a yes. it
Yes,
sounds.
both conditions.
So then you would be granting the appeal?
Yes. We grant,
Well, hold on a second. What is it that's being appealed exactly?
no, we're denying the
You could
appeal.
grant...
I'm sorry, Pat Brown, for the record. The appellant has appealed the granting of a variance. What I recommended is just add 2 conditions to the grant which the commission had. So, if you're only modifying conditions, then you're technically denying that appeal,
Okay.
if you're granting the variance.
Okay, so our action then, you understand what we're trying to do. What is the appropriate action? Madam Attorney?
I'm sorry, Councilman.
To meet the objectives of both Councilman Weiser and myself, what is our action to be consistent? I want to make sure we do it the right way.
Consistent with actions you've taken in the past, I would suggest that you grant the appeal in part to modify the conditions.
Okay. Okay, and that'd be 2-1.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
I'm sorry, but I have to raise this. I don't understand what the
Mr. Evans,
modification is.
that was
for
done.
valet.
Please.
I don't understand.
That's the
I'd like
action.
some
We'll explain to you afterwards. All right, folks. So that's the action of this committee on this item. Anything else, Roberto?
Public comment, Council.
Okay, this committee would like to open this up for public comment from general. Seeing no one interested. Oh, Ms. Gonzalez.
Thank you for all doing such a wonderful job, and really for taking the neighborhood councils in consideration, because I think some of us on the Land Use and Planning Committee are doing an excellent job, and I think we're sticking to the law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that concludes this committee session. Thank you so much.